Although it's not quite as extreme as Jonah being, I hate these people, I'm not going to do this, and God forces him to do it, and it's a great success, but then he's really angry. So our model's not that. Our model certainly hasn't been without its flaws or well planned out. It just seems that God is creating opportunities, and we're going through that door to see what happens, and then he's building on that. But is it planned? Is it something we've come up with? No, other than that original question I said earlier, is to ask that question, how do you best serve God with what you have?
Welcome back everyone to the Shock Absorber podcast, and it is awesome to have you along with us. My name's Joel, one of the co-hosts here, and we're here at Miranda Congregational Church in our podcast studio, which we like to call Third Space Studio. I'm joined by two lovely men on what we call on the Chip Lunch podcast the Salubrious Lounge. Because it started with salubrious, and then because it's blue, Braden, one of our pastors, called it salubrious.
Salubrious.
Yes.
That's a lot harder to say.
Fast, yeah.
It is. Yeah, that's very hard. Tim, welcome back to the podcast. You
Thank you, Joel.
Here last week, but it's lovely to have you back.
It's great to be
Same jumper as last time, I think.
Oh, no, it's my new favourite jumper.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is that because it's new and it's warm?
Yes, absolutely. And it's really cold in Sydney at the moment.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yesterday, I think it was even colder than today. There was a little bit of ice on my windscreen.
Okay, yeah.
Well, my car is parked outside. But I was like, whoa, it is really cold. And I didn't realise it was that cold until I walked out of the door. And I was worried that my daughter was underdressed a little bit for preschool. But then I just wiped the windscreen. I'm like, it was like this couple of pieces of ice came off it. I'm like, oh, that's cold.
Yeah.
It is cold.
Today, when we're recording, is the winter solstice. So it's the shortest day of the year. It doesn't necessarily mean the coldest, but it is.
Very cold yesterday, and it's not much warmer today.
That's true.
Yes.
So, yeah. Sunlight increases from tomorrow.
Excellent.
Exciting.
It's only going to get better.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, can only get better. The voice you can hear on the other side is Anthony. Welcome.
Thanks, Joel.
We are having you on the podcast today because you and your wife Trudi are planning very soon to go over to Ethiopia for long term, and we're going to chat about that. And you've been a number of times before, but you're going to go for a much longer period.
Yes.
And so we're going to start hearing about that as we go through the podcast, and your feelings about it and what you think God's planned for you and all those kind of things. But before we do that, we always like to start with a cultural artifact. And as our very esteemed guest on the podcast, you said you had one for us. You just started reading a book.
I just started reading a book called Biblical Critical Theory by Christopher Watkins. So I've only read the first little bit, but I really love biblical theology, and he links this in with culture really well, I think. I haven't read it yet. I've only read, as I said, I think I've read the first 2 chapters, but looking forward to it.
First impressions so far, because Tim's read it, so we'll get Tim's thoughts on it.
Loving the detail that he goes into. Like, I've just read about creation and just how he brings out points from the Bible and relates that to culture and how the Bible fits together. Love it. Good so far.
Yeah, good so far. And Tim, your sociological interest is very piqued by this book.
Oh yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it was really good.
It's a very large volume, though.
Yeah, it is a large volume. It's thick. It does a lot of heavy work in terms of both theologically, but also philosophically, sociologically. Like, he's bringing a lot into this. Having said that, it's quite readable.
Oh, okay, that's good.
For if you, I suppose, I don't know what the reading level would be. Maybe upper high school, higher high school. But if the names of philosophers and sociologists and theologians don't scare you, then you could probably do a good job reading through.
Okay.
And he'll mix. He'll talk about Nietzsche on the one hand and then Taylor Swift, like, interchangeably. Like, he's just so much pop culture in the way that he refers to things, as well as his deep reading. So there's this back and forth all the way through. So, but we read it as a YouthWorks staff team last year, which was really helpful, really good. Yeah.
What do you think, how has it helped you, reading that book?
Yeah, I was just pulling up a few reviews here just to remind myself of what it is. The Christianity Today review, the heading here, I think, is really good. It says, the Bible does everything critical theory does, but better. And this is his whole motif, is this whole idea of a critical theory is one that looks at the world as it is and critiques it from a particular point of view. So a feminist critical theory will critique what we see here and filter all of that through a feminist lens. Okay, what's happening to the women in this story? What's happening to the girls in this story? Where are power dynamics happening that oppress women and overplay men? So that's a feminist critical theory will do that, and so forth. You can, racial critical theories, etc., etc. So he's using that same kind of dynamic of a critical theory as one that looks at culture and says, all right, how do we interact with and critique culture? And his is a biblical critical theory. So using the Bible. So this is what Anthony said about the biblical theology. He starts from Genesis, works all his way through to new creation, Revelation 21, 22. And so he is simultaneously telling the story of biblical theology and telling the story of the Bible and using that as a lens through which to go, okay, well, so therefore how do we understand advertising, the fact we live in a capitalist society and you walk past however many thousands of adverts per day? How do you understand that? Because of creation, redemption, new creation, sin, fallenness, all of those kinds of things. And so, he does that in a really, really helpful and deep, thick way, like really, really robust kind of way.
And he picks apart like two different worldly theories and how the Bible, not being a compromise, but actually has a better way of fulfilling those two theories. For example, he pulls apart things quite regularly. I'm trying to think of an example, but I can't think of one off the top of my head.
I can't think of, but his phrase is diagonalizing.
Yes.
So he diagonal. So these ideas. So maybe take environmentalism, like we should absolutely save the planet, and so therefore reduce industry in order to save the natural world, versus no, we need to increase industry because human flourishing comes from an increase in industry, even if that comes at the detriment of the planet and environment. Environment. And he would say here are two particular secular worldviews. And he said, well, if you properly understand creation and the creational mandate, we actually see that the Bible can hold both of those two in tension in a way that both affirms both and holds both relative to each other. So you don't have to play these off against each other. You can affirm the need for both. And so all the way through, he's tracking these. And kind of this is rooted in his sense of fallenness. So because of Genesis 3 and the fact that we are fallen, we will err towards de-emphasizing some part of God's story against the other. So the high environmentalists will say, well, no, like if people have to freeze in order to not cut down the Amazon for burning wood or mining the earth for coal, then it's probably better for the humans to extinct. And so you have some on the very far environmentalist side who are for antinatalism and for we should reduce the population. We should be enforcing that from a government level down, because actually the natural world is so important that human need doesn't overtake the need to look after the environment. And then you've got right over the other side of the equation, well, no, industry is so key to human flourishing, and if we've got to kill a few rainforests or dig up a few coal, like massive mines, in order to achieve that, and if that pollutes and bleaches the Great Barrier Reef, so be it. Like we actually need human flourishing, and industry will help support that. And so you have these kind of two tensions, and the way he then unpacks a deep, rich, thick theology of creation and is to say, but the Bible can hold both of these in tension at the same time, and then he starts to give solutions. So that would be a good example of that.
So he's drawing a diagonal line in between the two in a sense.
Yeah, so that's his whole diagonalizing. He's drawing a diagonal line. So it's not a little bit of this and a little bit of this.
It's not a compromise. It's the ultimate solution, if you like.
Yes.
Okay. That the Bible brings. Yeah. And I actually, back on what you said about the philosophers, I'm not very philosophical, but I didn't find that overwhelming. So because his style of writing is fairly easy to read.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah,
right.
And the points that he makes are really interesting. So that kept me going.
Anthony, you said you've just started to read it. Was there like a particular motivation behind wanting to read this book at this particular time?
I'm particularly into biblical theology. It's probably the main thing I've been teaching in Ethiopia. So biblical theology, for anyone who's unsure, it's basically treating the Bible as one book, and it puts all of the Bible into context. So when you are looking at any particular passage or book, you can see its context in the flow of the whole story of the Bible. Yep. So I think after the gospel, I think it's pretty close to the next most important thing I would be teaching in a Bible college. I
have learned a lot about that just doing the certificate of theology. You're kind of aware that the Bible is I have been aware of the Bible being a whole story, but until you kind of dig into it a bit, you're like,
Yeah.
And I found that, and it's interesting you said that you found that's been really great when you've been teaching that in Ethiopia. Yeah. Same for me though, is that I think my faith has been strengthened a lot by it, and then also your ability to share the gospel, that is really, really important. So
I think it's foundational to at least to any other biblical subject. So if you want to study Corinthians, it's probably good to have done some biblical theology before you look into that. I found that's really helpful.
We're taking a break from, we were talking about our series lately, we've been talking about being resilient disciples. I think this will kind of come up in a sense anyway, but it's cool that you brought up biblical critical theory, because it's kind of a bridge from what we were talking about last week of being one of the ways of being resilient disciples is that we have cultural discernment. So that biblical critical theory makes a lot of sense in that regard. But we're going to focus on your move to Ethiopia, impending move to Ethiopia.
Yep.
Tell us though, what led you to this position that you and your wife Trudi decided to say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to move over to Ethiopia long term in order to hopefully share the truth and love of Jesus.
Long story, but I'll try and keep it brief for time and interest. Basically, I was born. Essentially, since we've been married, really, we've always asked the question: how do we best serve God with what we have?
Right.
And the answer to that can be anything, really. But in asking that question, I think I've been in secular work most of my life, so I think the risk is that you forget to ask that question and you drift along in your life, and suddenly 10 years have gone by and you haven't reevaluated how do you best serve God, because that can change over time, particularly in transitional stages of your life. Whether it's marriage, having kids, or parents, looking after parents, or losing a job or whatever. There's good times to ask that question in particular. So Trudi and I have always looked to ask that question, and that led us to explore, should I become an Anglican minister or not?
Okay.
And so we went to Moore College for a year in 2000 to look into that. The answer was no, but that's okay. Stu, I love what you do. But what it did do is that we saw some students present on teaching biblical theology in Nigeria. And I looked at a mate of mine and we kind of said, we could do that. And so we started to explore how that could work. And it ended up, Nigeria fell through, and it's slightly a funny, bad story, but we organised a trip to go to Nigeria, and we had a location all sorted. But at that time, the Miss World competition was held at Nigeria.
Oh.
And because Nigeria is sort of half Christian, half Muslim, there's a lot of tension, particularly about Miss World competition back then, and it led to a lot of riots, and a whole lot of people were killed at the back of the compound we were going to. So we didn't go there. Yep. We went to India instead, and started teaching the Bible there in my annual leave and stuff like that, because I thought it was something I could do, teaching biblical theology.
So something you're passionate about.
Something I'm passionate about, interested in, and I think a lot of these pastors in India in particular weren't getting any theological education, so biblical theology is a good grounding for any other theological education they might get later on.
Yep.
So that was part of it. So I ended up doing that for a number of years. But at the same time, some friends were visited their compassion child sponsor, their child sponsor in Ethiopia, and it happened to be at this location which had a Bible college. Mm-hmm. And they got to talking about the leaders there, and they said, "Oh, we know this guy Anthony that teaches in India," and they said, "Oh, can he come to Ethiopia?" So I came. That was in 2008. I went there, taught, and basically, if you know anything about me, I'm analytical. I plan things. I don't rush into things. But I sent an email to all of my friends while I was over there saying, when we come back as a family. And I hadn't spoken to Trudi about this, and unfortunately, she's always wanted to be a missionary in Africa. I never have. So we ended up, that was okay. We ended up going back as a family and spending 10 weeks there the following year, so 2009. And that's when we fell in love with the place. Both Trudi and I became good friends with the local leaders in the north of Ethiopia.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, wow. So that was the starting.
And I think, because we had Trudi on Chip and Lunch podcast before, and she said, you guys have been there 15 times now, is that right?
15 years. Okay. The last 15 years. I've probably been maybe a dozen times.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What is when you first went to Ethiopia, what was like the biggest culture shock that you can remember?
Interesting. In all honesty, the biggest culture shock was coming back, reverse culture shock.
Okay.
So I couldn't go to Miranda Fair for about 2 weeks after coming back. Just the consumerism was overwhelming for me after being in a situation of poverty and suffering, which was fairly commonplace in Ethiopia. So seeing beggars on the street, people asking for food wherever you go. So that was hard. But I actually found coming back harder. And that declines. Within about 2 weeks, I'm back to normal. So it's not like a permanent thing, but it's happened every time I've been.
Mm-hmm. Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Tim, you've been to Africa as well? Uganda?
Very briefly,
right?
yes.
Very briefly, yes.
Yep.
Did you have a similar thing when you went to Uganda and came back? Or was it just more of a culture shock going into Uganda?
I don't think I was there long enough to experience the culture shock coming back. It was more like a interesting, exotic holiday. In terms of, I don't mean that crassly. I mean as in it was just
new.
It was new. It was very not Western suburbia, and so there was that. Oh, this is curious and interesting and. It was just me and my CEO at the time for YouthWorks. He had been a number of times. He's got good relationships with a number of the Anglicans right throughout Africa. And so it was his 5th or 6th trip over to speak or be a part of a large youth convention. And youth for Africa is kind of 12 to 30-year-olds. So it's teenagers and young adults, as I guess you would say. And so he was invited back, and he had a habit of taking people with him, whether it be one of his own kids or someone else along. And so I think it was 2016, I think it might have been, took me across with him. And so, we got hosted by Onesimus, who was then an archdeacon at the time. I think he's now a bishop. And he hosted us, took us around, put us up in hotels. So that was really lovely. I think part of the experience was it was a hosted visit. There was particular things that we were doing so there was an clear itinerary throughout the day. So there were interesting bits of going, oh, this is very not suburban Sydney. But I don't think I was either there long enough to have a full culture shock there or on the return.
Yeah, fair enough. I've got a question there though, and you guys were actually alluding to this before we started recording. What's it like spending quite a bit of time there where you probably can't speak the language very well? Why don't you go first, Anthony? But you had a really interesting discussion about translators. I wonder if you can tell us about that, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. We were talking about whether how it's hard sometimes speaking English when people may not understand you very well, and that can lead to all sorts of problems. And then we got to talking about translators, and that's not always guaranteed of success either. And I just told the story of when I was in India once, Westerner was preaching, and suddenly everyone started laughing, all the congregation of Indians started laughing, and I just thought it was a bit too much. And so I was sitting next to an Indian guy, and I said, "What happened there? I'm missing something." And he said, "Oh yeah, the translator just said, the guy made a joke. It's not funny. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if everyone laughs now, it'll be fine." So when you don't know the language, you miss these nuances.
Yeah, totally. That's really funny.
But the other thing I said before too about working with a translator is often good too, because you've got time to think before you say your next sentence, which can be really helpful, particularly if you're teaching something that you're not particularly familiar with, or it's been you've been asked to do it off the cuff. So it can be a positive.
Does it help you learn the language in the other way? If you say something and then that gets translated, does that help you learn the language back in the other way?
I think it does a little, but I'm usually too focused on what I'm going to say to learn language that way. But if I was watching someone being translated, that would probably be a much more effective way to,
Was that similar for you, Tim, even when you're your 10 days in Uganda?
So in Uganda, particularly where we were, English is, I don't know if it's an official language, but it's a dominant language.
Oh, it's widely spoken. Okay.
Yeah, widely spoken. So you, and because Uganda, like I imagine most of Africa, there's lots of different tribal and language groups there. So they'll all have their language group for their tribal area that they'll grow up learning. But you learn English fairly quickly because it's
language of education, is it?
Yeah, well, I guess so. Yeah, so definitely in the schools. And, so yes, all of our hosts, all of the restaurants and hotels and staff and traffic officials and everyone that you talk to can speak English. So it's relatively easy to get around in that way. When we went to the youth conference, it was interesting. So there were some things that were in English, some things that were in local languages. And so I was just telling the story before that there were some big talks. There was probably about 10,000 attendees there at this school in this big open field area. And so you had the preachers that were doing sessions, and you had their translator with them. So if the preacher was speaking in one of the local languages, the translator would communicate in English, and vice versa. If, when my boss spoke, he did a 40-minute sermon, so he spoke in English and it was translated. And one of the things that was most interesting to me was I didn't pick up any language by doing that, but I was watching the translators, and they would not just communicate the language, but they would also embody the personality.
Of the speaker. So some of the speakers were quite, large personalities, very charismatic. They were
animated.
They were wandering back and forward across the field. They were, shouting and gesticulating with their hands, and you watch the translator, and they were mirroring all of that. They were also wandering back and forward. They were also being very large with their hands. They were also gesticulating. So, but then that same translator, my boss is at the time, Zach. He is not a large, charismatic personality. He's more of a stand still, preach the gospel, open the word, and so the translator for him was also very much standing there, translating the word, so the mirroring of personality and tone and gesticulations was just really fascinating for me as well. So that was really interesting to watch. The other experience I had was I got told before we left that I was going to lead a seminar on how to teach children through song. So I prepared a seminar, I had some handouts, I got told you'd probably be in the classroom with the translator, so I go, great, I'll make some slides up to make it a little bit more interesting. When we got there, it was like, we're going to split up into these seminars now. Tim, you're under that tree. You may or may not have a translator, we're not sure if one's available, and you'll just have whoever turns up.
Okay.
So I ended up under this tree with 50 delegates there of sort of late high school, maybe age 15, 16, 17.
Right.
I had no idea if they could speak English or not. They didn't give a lot back. And so I started trying with my seminar of I guess I'll just say, it didn't land. Like I was just watching them and they're all polite, but
Yes.
just, a blankness in their eyes. So I just go, all right, let's just sing songs together. So I just taught them some songs that we knew from children's ministry in Australia, and they sang, we just all sang together. And that was my entire seminar because I had nothing else up my sleeve.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that was really interesting.
Is it hard, Anthony, trying to communicate the gospel in somewhere like Ethiopia where you can't fully speak the language?
Definitely. I mean, even in the Bible college that we're going to, it's an English Bible college, but the heart language of everyone there is Amharic. So the corridor conversations are in Amharic. The prayer times are in Amharic. If you get to a difficult theological point, they'll talk about it in Amharic because English just doesn't go far enough or clear enough for the students. Even some of the students' English is probably no better than Joel's Amharic, which is close to nil, I presume.
Zero.
So you're dealing with students who have been sent to Bible college because they're godly people, not because they meet the criteria of having the English skills to be able to go there. So yes, it's a big impediment to only have English. And that's why Trudi and I, when we go, we'll spend at least a year full time in Addis doing language learning. But language learning is a lifetime thing. We'll probably never, be fluent. But we'll keep working at it.
What would you relate? Like, if you hear Amharic, where do you think the origins of that are? Or you probably know.
It's a Semitic language like Aramaic.
Oh, okay.
So it's. The Ethiopians, or at least the Amhara anyway, in the north, they came from Yemen originally.
Okay, yeah.
So there's that sort of area is where the language came from.
Wow,
but it's quite an ancient language.
I just find it so fascinating to, like, even ancient history. It's like you see those the Amharic people came from
Yemen.
Yeah. And that's what's influenced how that language is developed, and that's what influences how they speak today. Like, it's so fascinating that ancient history just has those influences.
Yeah, they don't see themselves as African.
Oh, really, that's interesting.
In particular, they see them more. Some people see themselves as the Jews of Africa. Ethiopia, at least the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is what Amhara mostly are, Orthodox. They have a strong, a rich religious history, if you like. So they believe that the Queen of Sheba came from Ethiopia, which I've been to some of her historical sites, so that seems pretty clear. But went and visited Solomon. Pretty easy to believe that they had an affair because Solomon had 1,000 wives, so
a reasonable number of affairs.
Reasonable chance that happened.
Yeah.
She fell pregnant and her son became the first king of Ethiopia. And so the kings of Ethiopia, which ended in 1974, trace their lineage back to Solomon. Wow. So a strong Jewish connection with the Orthodox.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Why did the king rule end in 1974?
Communist takeover. So they shot the emperor. And so it's quite a horrible story, actually. So the emperor in Haile Selassie, people may have heard of him. He's quite famous. He was emperor from the 1920s to 74. In the 50s and 60s, he wanted to westernize Ethiopia. So he sent a lot of the kind of elite students, kind of like the Daniel people in the Bible, to America to get education. Well, a lot of them came back as socialists or communists. And so that backfired. And ultimately, a combination of those students and the military took over the country with a communist coup in 74.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which ended in 91. So, but yeah, they were communists for that period.
Along with the fall of other communist regimes, or was it just?
No, I think independent of that.
Ah, okay. Wow. See, I love history. That's why I'm asking questions. So I apologise if that's
I'd
boring anyone on the podcast. So let's move on to Ethiopia. Going there long term. why now, and why is it? Why do you see this as the thing that you and Trudi want to do?
Yeah. So why now? We've been talking to CMS for 20 years, off and on, starting the application process. And last time we started, Anna, our daughter, was in year 9. They said, probably a bad time to go overseas to somewhere like Ethiopia when your daughter is in the middle of high school. And so they said, come back when she's finished high school, which she's now at uni. And so the timing was right in that sense for us. We'd developed relationships with Ethiopia, and also our kids, Matt, Sarah and Anna, are really keen for us to go. So we had the support of them as well. Why is it strategic from our point of view, I guess, to go to Ethiopia? Over that 15 years, we've got to know the leaders of the North. The Protestant church in the North is very small, like about 0.2% of people are believers in the North. And the Bible college we're going to work at is one of only 2 full-time Bible colleges in an area of 25 million people. So about 60 students. You know, there's more Bible colleges in Sydney than there is in the whole of northern Ethiopia. So it's strategic in that sense with the Bible colleges there. And also it's strategic because over that 15 years we've been working with the Indigenous leaders and believers, and there is a whole lot of opportunity, a whole lot of invitations from Muslim tribes and other people to hear the gospel.
Interesting.
And Trudi and I can't do that ourselves, but what we can do is help equip the local believers to take on those invitations. So there's an opportunity there as well. So and also, I guess, again, as part of the fledgling church, the anyone who's done, I think you said you've done some certificate of theology.
Yeah.
How many subjects have you done?
5. I've got
5.
1 left.
So you're 5 subjects ahead of most Ethiopian rural pastors in terms of their theological education.
Right.
So you could probably be almost a bishop there.
Nice.
With your theological background. So
if you don't hear Joel next week, you know what's happened.
That's right. He got tempted. I don't say that flippantly. It's just the actual situation that the pastors are not getting a theological education to lead their churches, and that's what they want. So again, by going and working in a Bible college, we can help them with that situation that they want to help improve.
I mean, it's cool that they want to. It's just the resource to be able to do that isn't there.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay.
That's right.
Tim, any particular thoughts about why it would be important to have that theological training? Because as Anthony has already said a number of times, it's a great basis to have something. You now lecture, you've studied at Bible college. Something that we said on Trudi's podcast earlier was just, and as I said before, the certificate of theology was like, it's opened up so many other things for me to thinking about. In your experience, how has studying at college helped you understand the Bible more? And then maybe we can see, like, that's one of the reasons why Anthony's going, right? So how has it helped you in terms of understanding your faith and your relationship with God?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think big picture, obviously, any skill you want to grow in, you want to sit at the feet of master and learn how to do. You know, it could be woodworking, it could be plumbing, it could be electricity. Yeah, I mean, TAFE, the whole idea of an apprenticeship is you go and sit with people who know what they're doing, and it just happens to be, you know, my field is theology and children's ministry and philosophy and sociology, and so, you know, this very heady and academic. I wouldn't know where to put the left-handed screwdriver, but it's in terms of that, I want to learn those things. So, you know, you go to Bible college and you learn how to do those things for the sake of then being in a role where you are then teaching. So, I mean, children is my main space, I suppose. You know, I think about children's ministry all the time. I want young people to know, love and obey King Jesus. And so if I want them to be able to learn from me I need to be able to learn from those who are wiser than me and then reshape that. Sometimes it is directly relevant, as in I'm learning from other children's ministry-minded people. I was on a Zoom call this morning with people from all around the world thinking about children's spirituality. We've got a little book club together that came out of the conference we were at in Chicago a couple of weeks ago.
Nice.
And so there was only 4 of us on today because a few people on Northern Hemisphere summer holidays. But so some of that is we are all children's ministry people thinking about children's ministry, and sometimes it's about a particular skill, like going to Bible college and learning from the experts in New Testament Greek exegesis, or the experts in John's Gospel, because if I know John's Gospel to a very large extent, then when it comes to teaching children, where to narrow in on this particular thing. You can read the Bible, and again, like going back to the start of the conversation, biblical theology is really key here. There's so much in John's Gospel to know and to teach. How do I know what the right things are to focus on? How do you know what is the right emphasis of this particular chapter? Well, it comes from a deep understanding of the whole Bible and of this particular book. So, it's essential that our leaders are learning and growing and seeing these things as those responsible for teaching the flock, growing other disciples of Jesus. And it's why when you go right back through Christian church history, often the minister of the church was the most educated person in a particular township, parish, area, whatever it is, because they had to be. I mean, we, as Christianity, we have a book, so there is inherently reading, bookish, that kind of cognitive learning that's engaged, as well as the really significant spiritual side. So people like the mystics and the monastics and those who are deeply in prayer life and those kinds of things. That's a different side of faith, and so when those two come together, helpfully, we get both the rich theological cognitive work with the rich spiritual side. And you've also got the practical help because, the Bible, the gospel necessarily has practical outworkings in the way that you love God and love others. And so, again, Trudi and Anthony have said this on a number of occasions that I've talked to them one-on-one or they've presented at things, but, even, the Muslim majority areas that you've worked in can see that there is social good that comes from, Trudi's nursing and childhood health stuff. And they might not recognise that for Trudi, that's an outworking of the gospel. But for Trudi, it's an outworking of the gospel. She loves Jesus, therefore she loves others, therefore she wants to help the children in this community thrive. Therefore, she will bring her health to that need. And so, as Christianity holds those three together, the cognitive aspect, the spiritual relational aspect, and the social good aspect, the active part of faith, we want to express that out. And so, so I think learning has really helped in that.
Helps diagonalise.
Well, you diagonalise, pull them together, whatever it is. It's holistic.
It is.
It's holistic faith.
Yeah, and reveals the character of God, which is all-encompassing,
that's right.
Incredibly holistic, Anthony, I just wanted to delve in a little bit more in terms of what you're going into. And in terms of what Ethiopia is, you spoke a little bit about only 0.2% of the area that you're going to in northern Ethiopia is Protestant.
Yes.
The dominating two religions are Islam and
Orthodox.
Orthodox,
Ethiopian
right.
Orthodox, yeah.
I remember Trudi saying that's very works-based, though, the Orthodox. There isn't a lot of, what did she say? They were speaking to someone about the gospel, and she said the thing that we're missing is forgiveness and generosity. So that doesn't really resonate around in their culture. So what do you see? I mean, it's so important, like we're saying, of being able to set a biblical theology as a foundation, and that's I know that's one of your passions and why you're really excited to go. And how are you gonna do that in that kind of scenario?
So background with the Ethiopian Orthodox. Ethiopian Orthodox has a a wide range of views, but generally they don't open the Bible because it's a holy book, and you don't want to read it because if you read it, you might get it wrong. So best.
Really?
So every church will have a Bible in it, but it's wrapped up and put in the place of honor.
Fascinating.
But never opened. I know it's. So don't think Greek or Russian Orthodox. It's quite different. They split from the other Orthodox churches around 500 AD.
Oh,
So there's.
do you know why?
Yeah, I do. So we believe in the Nicene Creed. We say it at church quite regularly. The Orthodox Church, including the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, signed that. Tick. We're all happy campers.
We agree. Yes.
We all agree. But at the Council of Chalcedon, this was where the aim of that council was to talk about the dual nature of Christ.
Okay.
So Jesus comes, when he's incarnated, comes as a man, so he's God and man when he goes to the cross. Everyone's on board with that at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
Then when he dies and goes to heaven, the Ethiopian Orthodox believe he's only God. Now this creates a problem.
Not man.
Not man
Okay,
anymore.
that's what their belief is. Yeah.
That's what they believe. And so this creates a problem because for us, we're humanity and there's God, but we have Jesus in between as our mediator between God and man because he's God and man.
Yep.
So it works really well.
And he continues in his humanity.
Continues in his humanity. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what the Council of Chalcedon says. But with the Ethiopian Orthodox, Jesus is God only, and therefore he is somewhat distant.
Right.
There's no way to easily come into contact with Jesus if he's God only. And so what they do to fill that gap is they pray to Mary, they pray to saints, or they pray to angels.
Okay.
And so a combination of that theology with a heavy focus on works. So their theology has become very ritualized. Go to church, fast regularly. They are very, very devout people, but they have no understanding of salvation by grace. So it's salvation by works.
Yep.
And also throw into that is a bit of syncretism. So what they've done is if you go to your priest with a problem, if he can't answer your problem, you go to the witch doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sounds counterintuitive, but again, because of they've lost some aspect of the supernatural side of Christianity, and thus only a witch doctor can deal with that, which supernatural stuff is a really big thing in Ethiopia and as it is in lots of parts of Africa. But the solution for the Orthodox is to go to the witch doctor to help them through those kinds of issues.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So therefore, what you're left with in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a church that doesn't know Jesus. Because of the growth of the Protestant church in the south, it's kind of like two countries. The south, there's a lot of Protestant churches, but in the north, it's, as I said before, 0.2%. Because of that, you're not allowed to mention Jesus because they see the Protestant church as a fake Christianity, an inferior breed of Christianity that's wrong because they have the true Christianity.
Wow. And that, obviously informed by that theological understanding that they have. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
and all heavily influenced effectively by missionary monks that came during the Crusades and had the same philosophy that the other Christians were against at the Council of Chalcedon. So they kind of fled Europe and went to Ethiopia and reinforced the single nature of Jesus, which it's in fact in the title of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a reference to in the full title is a reference to the single nature of Christ. So that's how big an issue it is for them.
But then, as you said, that creates issues where, like, not understanding what the personal relationship with God, which is what Jesus enables. Right. Yeah. Okay. And then, therefore, there's those things that Trudi said was that there's a lack of understanding of generosity and forgiveness. They
don't understand. Probably one of the biggest differences between, say, Australia and Ethiopia, and there's probably thousands of things, but because we've got a Judeo-Christian heritage, I think our society has a reasonable understanding of love. but the Ethiopian Orthodox don't understand love at all. And so when you show love, and this is where contextualization comes in, because it's an area of persecution and poverty, you can't just go in and start evangelizing people, and it's also an area of violence, because you'll probably be driven off or perhaps killed. And so you need to contextualize the gospel, and the best way to do that is to, Christians will be known by their love. So if you love God and love others, actually that stands out significantly, which we didn't know. We were oblivious when we started going to Ethiopia. But that's the thing that really all the tribes in the area we're working in, they notice significantly is when you love, it stands out.
I remember you and Trudi relaying a story to us about a man who was a Christian. He was basically ostracized completely, and now has become a village elder.
Yes,
because people trust him.
Yes, Gaitachu. Yes,
is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So can you just enlighten us on the fact that why is there this immediate distrust of him? And you talked about it a lot in terms of the Orthodox vision of that. But then why has now he become a trusted member? So why is there distrust and then it moves all the way to trust?
Yeah, so the distrust, so this man, he became an SIM missionary, came to his village in 1974 and taught. He had a 12-year-old son, and so he decided to teach 12-year-olds English using the Bible. And so he had a group of students. This man heard the gospel as part of that teaching. So ESL, great thing to do. And he believed the Bible and then continued to read the Bible the rest of his life. Because of what I said before about the Ethiopian Orthodox not wanting you to read the Bible, he was persecuted and ostracized socially because he read the Bible. So that's why he was persecuted. As believers, more people became believers in this area, the Orthodox got to see love by the believers to them, even though they were persecuting them. They still saw love, and they started to ask, why do you love us? And then that was then the opportunity to tell them the gospel and the great news about Jesus. And so over time, what we expect working with church planting in Ethiopia, slowly, one Christian here, one Christian there, and that's effectively what happened. But what we didn't expect is that as the believers modelled love, the social culture changed dramatically because they'd not seen love modelled before. And ultimately that led to this man then becoming an elder when eventually they went, we don't want to persecute these people anymore because they're actually on our side. And they recognised his integrity and honesty as a Christian, and therefore wanted him to make leadership decisions for the community.
It's sounding very similar to what you read about the very early church in the Roman society. The Christians were just there, just doing their thing.
Very much like that.
They loved not just each other, but they loved their pagan neighbours in such a way that the pagans could not make sense of this and didn't know what to do, but thought,
exactly right.
But I actually prefer this to the way that Roman society tells us to distrust or to harm each other. There's a famous line, I can't remember any of the particular names and dates or details, but essentially this Roman pagan high-up senator, someone says, we've got to do something about these Christians. They love not only themselves, but us as well. And this idea that, we don't even love our own citizens, and yet they do, and they're the persecuted minority, and it stands out. And God used that, I don't know what you'd say, servant-heartedness, that generosity, that living out the fruits of the Spirit to actually radically change the Roman Empire and from there the world.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think it's harder to do that in the Shire because it doesn't stand out quite as dramatically. But I think when I look at Solis as a growing church, I see, we talk about Jesus changes everything, and I think that's the foundation, the starting point, that Solis is doing in spades. That's great. But the second thing then added to that is the focus on relationship, and relationship is where you show love and that's where we talked about theological education, and Trudi and I are going to be missionaries, but really God has put every one of us in a situation where we have unique relationships. You have your family and friends and your work situation or your school or whatever, and you have an opportunity to be loving towards those people that God has designed for you to mingle with or whatever, to be with. And so that's effectively, an opportunity. So it's just, for us, it's led to something overseas in theological education, but really the opportunities for all of us to show that we love God and love others, and for people to then ask questions about that.
That story you shared about the man who became a Christian back in the 70s and then was ostracised for a long time, and then became a village elder, and then it's starting to impact the community.
Yes.
Is that one of those stories like that, is that what's really one of the driving motivations behind you wanting to go long term and see that change?
Certainly helps. If you go through our mission model, although it's not quite as extreme as Jonah being, I hate these people, I'm not going to do this, and God forces him to do it, and it's a great success, but then he's really angry. Well, our model's not that. Our model certainly hasn't been without its flaws or well planned out. It just seems that God is creating opportunities, and we're going through that door to see what happens, and then he's building on that. But is it planned? Is it something we've come up with? No, other than that original question I said earlier, is to ask that question, how do you best serve God with what you have? And that can be anything. The first time we went to Ethiopia as a family, we stayed for 10 weeks. Trudi and I both came back and said the number one skill an evangelist needs here is hairdressing.
No.
And so it's nothing to do with what Tim and I have been talking about, theological education, which is important. But as an evangelist, a really important skill was hairdressing, because Ethiopian women are really vain. And so if you become a hairdresser, it's a captive audience to talk to for a long time.
Wow.
And there was a lot of prostitutes in that town as well who also like to get their hair done. So there was a golden opportunity as a hairdresser to be an evangelist. So what I'm saying in a roundabout way is serving God is not only about theological education and serving in that way, it's really about using the gifts that God has given you. For me and for Tim, it's in that area, but it could be in hairdressing or plumbing or whatever, but it's using your gifts to serve God.
Have you done some hairdressing now in the CMS training?
I certainly wouldn't. I think I'd go bankrupt day one if I opened a salon.
I think it's interesting the way you said, like, you're not necessarily following an intentional plan that you have had, but you've just been faithful in the next steps. And it just reminds me two things. Firstly, that Ephesians 2:10, that just to do the good works, prepared in advance for you to walk in. It's just, God knows what he's doing with you guys. He's known for the last 20 years what he wanted you guys to do in Ethiopia. But you haven't known the plan in advance, and it hasn't been important for you to just to do that step by step. And then that takes me back to Abraham and that whole idea that God just said to Abraham, hey, how about you leave this place and go where I'll follow? And Abraham goes, okay. Not knowing where that was going. He didn't even know where God was going to say stop. He just said, okay, well, I trust you enough to just go. And I just think that's a great encouragement that you and Trudi and the whole family who have been caught up with that have been saying, okay, well, I'll do the next faithful thing, the next faithful step in front of me. And this is where we've got to at the moment in the story.
And I think it's been helpful in a lot of situations to be ignorant, because I think if we had have known, we may not have done the things that it seems like God wanted us to do.
God's graciousness,
God's
in
graciousness,
not
in
letting you know,
not revealing certain things to us at different times has been really helpful.
Yep.
Yeah.
And just in terms of talking about again what you're going into, what is the background? There's a fair bit of civil unrest at the moment.
Yes.
What is the genesis of that, or
Yeah.
what is that over?
Yeah, it's so in 2020, 2021, there was the third civil war in my lifetime in Ethiopia, where the previous people who were in the government tried to take the government back. And that the fighting was with, it's like a state called Tigray, which is in the far north near the Eritrean border with Ethiopia. So Tigray used to run the country. After the communists, we talked about that before, the Tigrinians ran the country. They lost power and then they wanted it back. So they basically effectively marched on the capital. So it's so they headed south towards the capital. There was a lot of fighting. The government with the Amara, because to get from Tigray to the capital, you have to go right through Amara, and also the Afar fought against Tigray and they won. However, after that, so that's 2020, 2021. After that, the Oromo, which is the biggest tribe and a Muslim tribe, basically then had power, military power in the country. And they've felt pressure on their land as the population grows, the land size doesn't increase, so that creates problems. And they've looked to essentially start to fight the Amara, which is the next tribe north of them. And so although the Amara were fighting with the government in the civil war, it's now the government run militarily by the Oromo, who are now fighting the Amara and basically stealing their land and destroying their infrastructure to destabilize them, to grab their lands.
So it's kind of rooted in tribal
Rooted
history?
in tribalism, yes.
Right.
Yes. So it's quite complicated. There's a whole lot more I could say, but that's as simple as I can put it.
That's okay. But can you tell me, what do you feel? How do you feel about that going into that?
Yeah, well, at the moment we can only go to the capital. So if you look on Australia's DFAT site, Ethiopia is basically red, which means don't go, or orange, which means probably don't go, and except for the capital Addis, which is yellow.
That's Addis Ababa.
Addis
is that right?
Ababa, yeah.
Is that how you say it?
Addis Ababa.
Addis Ababa, thank you.
And so we can go there, which was our plan anyway, to go there and do some language and cultural learning for 9 to 12 months. So our hope is that over that time, the fighting will settle down and we'll be able to go to the north to Bahidar, which is a lovely town on a big lake. But at the moment, we can't leave the capital. We can't go anywhere else in Ethiopia other than Addis.
Because of the
civil unrest.
Safety reasons, right.
Yes.
But you said that the plan, when you first go over, is to spend at least a year in Addis to
learn
language. And so you're able to communicate a bit more effectively.
Yes,
that's right.
Start that journey.
Yeah. And then, so if you are going in for the year now, and I'm sure that you're very sensitive to this, but what do you do differently? Because if you just came in hot and then just, as you said, you need to be a good idea is to be a hairdresser, or the relational aspect is really important.
Yes.
What are you doing in terms of? Because I would assume you're not going to go and then go, I'm the leader and this is what I'm going to sort out and all that kind of thing, because that would be rather disrespectful.
Yes.
How would you? How are you and Trudi planning to approach that, and what plans are in place to do that?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we chose CMS as a mission agency to go with is their model is to work under the Indigenous leadership, and that's what we wanted to do. So that was a big tick for us. So we were going to be working under the Indigenous leadership. So our goals are effectively going to be their goals. So we will work together to help them achieve their goals. And their main goal is like us to see a world that knows Jesus, but more specifically is to produce rural pastors for their churches.
To raise up
and equip leaders to do that.
So we obviously know their community a lot better than yourself.
Yes. So our goal is not to be evangelists. It doesn't mean we may not ever have conversations with people, but we have to cross that cultural divide to do that. So we probably can't do that well, and certainly nowhere near as well as the Ethiopian locals. So so we're looking to equip them. An interesting thing though is Ethiopian youth see Western education as the way out of poverty.
Okay.
And there's some truth in that, but the problem is do they learn best orally in a culture, which is not the way Western education mostly teaches, although it is probably heading more towards that, away from chalk and talk towards more oral-based things, or adult learning, I guess. And so, but the Ethiopians see oral learning as archaic, the Ethiopian youth. And so that creates a tension, because I can go into the Bible college and teach like you would, particularly 10, 20 years ago as a lecturer, and they would really value that. But is that going to that style going to communicate back in a rural village when they go back to work in a local church?
Right, there's real
My
tension
suspicion is no. And so you've got this quandary of they want to be taught in a Western way, but is that really the best way for them to learn, to be able to contextualize the gospel in a rural Ethiopian village?
So right, so there's a desire to go. We want to be more educated about certain
definitely
things.
Strong desire.
But then they see it as the, textbook, read and write, chalk and talk, as you said.
Yes.
To actually learn. But then, however, is that the best way for them to go back to their communities and
that's right.
and teach the gospel?
Yeah.
Wow.
So part of teaching in a Bible college or anywhere really is making sure that your teaching is contextualized. Otherwise, you're just teaching something that then they're not going to be able to teach, or they will teach and it's not going to be effective because. So there needs to be this way of working out how is your teaching them going to be transformative for the people they're going to be teaching. So that's something I'm going to have to learn a lot about, because I've not really lived in a rural village in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So
wow. My only, I suppose, it's probably my last question. I'll probably come up with more though. What have you seen change? You've been going, you said you've been 12 times in the last 15 years.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. What do you think's changed since the first time until maybe the last time you went? What have you seen God do in that period of time?
Yeah. Well, I think particularly in the community that we've worked in, we've seen a dramatic social change. So the believers have modelled loving God and loving others. And the community that we first went into, I went when I was invited. Pastor Faru, a former leader of the Northern Church, he was driving me to the airport. It's a 2-day drive. He said on the way, "Oh look, do you mind if we stop in at my village, my home village?" And I said, "No, I've never been to a village before. Love to go." Stayed the night there, 24 hours in this rural village. No one spoke English except for him, and he was off seeing friends and family. So it was quite a challenging time. What I found out later is that I was the first foreigner in living memory to be in that village.
Wow.
And again, this is what I say, that ignorance is really important, because they're a very violent people. And I was allowed in there because I was with Faru, whose name means one to be feared above all others. So that gives you an indication of the culture of Ethiopian, or of Amara culture in Ethiopia. So so that led to opportunities. So I went as a tourist and completely naive, but God used that. So I didn't have a plan. And Trudi then found out, and so she was jealous. So I want a village experience because you've had one. And so she went. So when I mentioned Jonah earlier, it was slightly tongue-in-cheek, but there's a little bit of, our mission model was ignorance, naivety, and jealousy. But God used that, and as we modeled loving God and loving others, a few people came to Christ, and that grew, and some other Ethiopians came and started working in the area and modeling loving God and loving others, and slowly that changed. And that was great, and we were hoping that slowly people would become Christian. But what we didn't expect is the cultural change to be as dramatic as it was when the Ethiopian Orthodox saw people loving God and loving others, because they are very family orientated, but very much a vengeance culture. So Joel, you kill my sister, I'm going to kill your brother. And it just creates blood feuds. But when they saw love modeled, we saw reconciliation of 20-year blood feuds. I saw this man, he had his AK-47 and he put his AK-47 at the feet of another man. And I'm kind of asking, well, like, this is all in Amharic, so I don't know what's going on. Like, what happened there? It seemed significant. Well, they've just ended the blood feud. And so as they saw love modeled, they realized that actually love is a better way to live. They didn't all become Christian, are believers like we would see it, but they changed socially. And then that love helped them to then, rather than working together as a family, they started working together as a community, and using their own resources were able to then improve the problems that they faced as a community through love and loving each other. And that then led to social change in the area.
It's interesting how you're saying that. I mean, it's so lovely to hear that. It's awesome to see that God's working that way. But something, Tim, you talked about before was kind of like, some theories are, if you see economic change, then you'll see people growing more or flourishing more. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to see that we've started here with love, and the social change is what's creating that.
This is
next.
Completely
that's really interesting.
What I didn't expect.
Yeah.
I didn't expect this at all.
Yeah.
So hence, it's all on God and the Holy Spirit, because Trudi and I had no plans or, plotting and scheming to achieve this. We just, tried to live a life showing loving God and loving others in the community we were in, which was at the time a rural village.
So it's an outworking of the gospel that you weren't expecting.
No, we didn't expect it.
That's really
we hoped maybe one or two people might come to Christ, and that would be an awesome outcome. But actually, God had bigger plans, and He was preparing.
But in my mind, it also creates an environment where becoming a Christian is more acceptable as well.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
It meant that the believers could open a church. So there was 50 believers in this village, but 3,000 people attended the opening because they all felt love then for these 50 believers. They now can freely evangelize, and they're not persecuted anymore in the area they're in. If they leave and go to other areas, it's all bets are off. But in this district, that's what happened. And so the Orthodox came in support of this church that opened, and Muslim people came in support of the church that opened, which is both unheard of. If you tell other Ethiopians and they go, no, that didn't happen.
Fair enough.
It's just so radically out of the ordinary, which shows that God is behind it.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move on, just talk about how people can support you, Anthony. Tim, did you have any final thoughts or questions for Anthony that we haven't covered? Because I felt like we left you out there a little bit.
Oh, no, that's okay. I'm fascinated by listening.
Yeah, so am I. That's why I kept wanting to ask questions.
Yeah. No, I just think it's lovely to see both the salvation change of people becoming Christians, but also that the social change, which is incomplete, going all the way back to biblical critical theory, is exactly what you would expect. God has set up creation in a particular way.
That's why I need to read the book.
That's what right. Yeah. But in terms of course, we see social change when the gospel is expressed and brought into and lived out, because that's how God has made the world to be. And, we pray, in the Lord's Prayer, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We want to see the flourishing of the earth in according to God's kingdom principles and kingdom ethics. And there's not a one-for-one correlation between salvation and God's goodness flowing. And Jesus says this himself, the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. And yet, God chooses to use the church, and he chooses to use Christians in order to bring flourishing to the world, which includes, those fruits of the Spirit and the other kinds of things. And so, yes, we absolutely want unsaved people who are outside the kingdom to become Christians and inside the kingdom. Like, their eternity is at stake.
Yes.
So it's, that is a driver of evangelical missions and always has been. And we want to continue to pray for Ethiopia and pray for those communities so that they will see life to death transformations. And we can also, alongside that, celebrate just the social good, the pro-social good that happens in these communities because Christians are living out the gospel. And that even the Muslims flourish because of peace, that resonates through this land. And again, to turn it full cycle, we want them to recognise this is interesting. Peace didn't flourish when we lived according to Ethiopian Orthodoxy or Islamic whatever. It is flourishing more under this evangelical Protestant Jesus. There's something attractive there. There's something beautiful there, and the fragrance of life that emanates out into the community. So it's this cyclical thing where they work hand in hand together. I think is really beautiful, and the fact you are seeing that firsthand is a great joy for you and for us.
It's an amazing experience. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
No, it's really encouraging, I think. Just listening to Trudi this morning and yourself, but also the faithfulness that you're approaching it with is really cool as well. You're like, God's going to take care of it, and He'll just put us in the positions that we need to be put in for His kingdom.
Yeah.
So, in respect to that, how are people able to support you if they're listening to this and they're keen on giving you some support? Like, what kind of support can they give, and how can they do it?
Yeah, definitely the number one thing is prayer support. I read a biography of a missionary to China just after World War I, and his name was James Fraser, and he said his view of prayer, again, this is after World War I, so he used a military analogy, but he said that with prayer, the people praying are the people in the trenches, doing the fighting against the devil through their prayers. Whereas him as the missionary, he's like the intelligence officer, giving the information for the people to pray about. And so I really like that analogy because it really underlines the value of prayer and how important it is. And sometimes I know I can be a bit flippant about my prayers and not really think to do it. So number one, we value your prayers. To be able to pray more effectively, I guess, for us, with more information, you could sign up to our prayer newsletter, which we will endeavour to write monthly. I have no promises, but I hope we will. If you just go on to a search engine and type in CMS and L-Yard, you'll come to a link and you can sign up for our newsletter. So that's...
I'll check that in the show notes as well.
Okay, awesome. So that would be great. Soul is also financially supporting us, which is awesome. We still need some more individual financial support, which would be great. But really, the main thing is prayer support. Yeah. And I think Trudi might have mentioned before also, we're going to leave our family. 2 of our kids and our grandkids and our daughter-in-law go to Solis. So we'd love you guys to look after them while we're gone. And really love to keep in contact because it is a sacrifice for us to move away. It's our choice. No one's making us do this, but we would really value to keep in contact with us because when we'll just value interaction with people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially when you're in a place that you're not totally used to living in.
Yeah,
you've been there before, but there's always
it's going to be
changing.
New being full time.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no end date. Is that right?
No end date
at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. We don't. I mean, I'm 56. Trudy's younger, and we see this kind of like our last career. We don't know how long it's going to go for. We're just going to give it a go, and Having said that, with CMS we aim to be back at least every 2 years for some months, 4 to 5 months every 2 years.
Okay.
But also we have a month's annual leave every year, so we could come back almost annually. We don't know how that's going to play out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony, it's been a pleasure having you on the
I've enjoyed it.
podcast.
Thank you.
It's been really
Thanks,
fun.
Ian.
Yeah, it's
Thanks,
been
Joel.
really, really cool to hear just your passion, first of all, for biblical theology, obviously,
Yeah,
but also
I
like
love
for other people to know it, and also, but most of all, people to know the gospel and know what Jesus can do, and to hear about things about it's making those real social changes, like that organic social change is just amazing to hear. So I really love hearing that. So thank you for sharing all the stories and knowledge and your knowledge as well, which has been awesome. Tim, of course, thank you as always. But always love having you on the podcast. If you do have any questions or you want to send a question to Anthony, you can email me at joel@shockabsorber.com.au and we'll send it on and we'll answer it on the podcast. We'll make it happen. Having said that, been lovely. Thank you very much for everyone listening and watching.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
No worries at all. And we always like to finish with a one way. So this is that.
One way.
One way.
One way.